member for Durham.
Let's talk about political influence, Mr. Speaker. In the first Liberal cabinet meeting, Scott Bryson interfered with a naval shipbuilding contract, and that action leaked out. The Prime Minister had the leak investigated, and the Privy Council office identified 73 people that were aware of the leak. So my question is simple. How many of the 73 names did the Prime Minister or the PCO give to the RCMP to investigate?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite is a lawyer and shares the same profession as me. He should know that when you investigate a charge, that's done by law enforcement, in this case the RCMP. He should also know that when you lay a charge, that's done by the Public Prosecution Service of Canada, an entity that his party created while in power. Thirdly, he should know that when a decision is made to withdraw a charge or stay it, that is also done by the Public Prosecution Service of Canada. All of those entities and all of those steps were taken independently, as they should be in this country.
The honourable member for Durham. Order.
Speaker, as that member should know, the Prime Minister asked for an investigation of the leak. 73 names were found to have known about the leak, but only one name was handed to the RCMP, Admiral Mark Norman. Without that investigation, Mr. Speaker, he would not have been relieved of command. Without that direction from the Prime Minister's office, he would not have lost his job, his reputation, and spent 2 years fighting for the vindication he had yesterday. Will that member stand in this House and apologize to Admiral Mark Norman?
Order. Order. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, in different contexts, I have a lot of respect for the member opposite, for the advocacy he does for the men and women in uniform in this country. But what I think is important to underscore is that there are men and women in uniform, namely the RCMP, that took charge of the very investigation that he's impugning. Exactly. And he's impugning the law enforcement officials and the independence of their work. And what I would put to him is that what he should also listen to is not just from our side of this aisle, but he should also listen to the defense counsel for Admiral Norman, who said, and I quote, "The decision to stay this prosecution was exercised by prosecutors and the DPP unimpacted by any political considerations, as it should be."
Order. Alors, l'honorable.
The Honourable. Order. The Honourable Member. Calm down. The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. One thing we do know, Mr. Speaker, is that former Minister Scott Bryson resigned because he didn't want to have to answer questions about the termination of the contract with Davy Shipyards for the Asterisk. The Prime Minister is complicit in having done all he could to prevent the disclosure of documents. If he really wanted the truth, he would have allowed the defence to have these documents. Does he still claim there was no political interference? Mr. Speaker, again, in French, there are three important things. First of all, the decision to launch an investigation on the part of the RCMP. Second, the PSPC decided to go forward. And third, it was the Director of Public Prosecutions who decided that the charges would be dropped. Here, the Director herself said,
nor was there any contact or influence from outside the PPSC, including political...
L'honorable député de Charlesbourg.
The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, is it true that the Prime Minister and the Privy Council took the decision to terminate the contract for the Astérix, jeopardizing all kinds of jobs in the Quebec region? Now, there were thousands of documents that had been requested by Norman's defense. Some were made public, but they were redacted. They didn't want certain witnesses interrogated, and the Prime Minister himself asked the RCMP to investigate. Why are they trying to convince Canadians that there was no political interference? The Parliamentary Secretary. Now, the Director herself said this With respect to the investigation and the legal process, she said that all obligations had been fulfilled, all documents were provided the court, more than 8,000 documents in all. And Mr. Speaker, with respect to the file and the documents, the judge thanked the departments and officials for their cooperation.
Richmond Hill.
Clearly, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister doesn't like it when people of honour stand up to him. He tried to interfere in a shipbuilding contract, but Admiral Norman protected the Navy and the delivery of the ship it needed. When the Prime Minister didn't get his way, he began a politically motivated campaign against Admiral Norman. He instructed the RCMP to investigate and told the public Norman would be charged and end up at trial. When will the Prime Minister realize that he can't use the power of his office to attack those he views as his enemies?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I respect the member's opposite service to this country, as we all respect Vice Admiral Norman's. But what I can underscore for her, and perhaps elaborate for her, is how the legal process works. The legal process conducts itself in an independent manner. When requests for documents are made, we identify the documents, redactions, and what is covered by cabinet confidences. Those decisions are made independent of political actors, as they should be. Furthermore, we don't intervene in that judicial process because we safeguard the independence of the judiciary and the rule of law. Exactly. That's the way the system is supposed to work, and that is something that I would hope all members of this House would appreciate and protect.
Hear, hear.
Order. The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
But, Mr. Speaker, those independent organizations can only make informed decisions if they have the documents to read them. The Prime Minister thinks he's above the law, and it's time to restore Canadians' confidence in the highest office in the land. We know that he politically interfered by refusing to turn over critical documents to Mark Norman's lawyers. He interfered by refusing to waive cabinet confidence, and he interfered by counseling key witnesses on what to say. Everyone knows this is political interference. When will the Prime Minister admit it?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, let's hear what the actual director had to say. Quote, no other factors were considered in this decision, nor was there any contact or influence from outside the PPSC, including political influence in either the initial decision to prosecute Mr. Norman or in the decision to stay the charge today. The reason why the Minister of Border Safety was so appalled by this line of questioning is because you don't impugn the integrity of people who are leading the judicial system or are independent officials, and secondly, you don't impugn the integrity of people who don't have a chance to stand up in this House and defend themselves. I'll do it for them. The Director of Public Prosecutions operated independently at all times.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Order. Mr. Speaker, whether it's Mark Norman's reputation or workers at Davie shipyards, the consequences of this Prime Minister's behaviour are significant. The Liberals have shown they have no respect for the rule of law. First, allegations of interference with witnesses and these hidden documents. People have the right to know the truth. Will the government launch a truly independent investigation to get to the bottom of this matter? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. What I want to underscore is that the investigation was conducted by the RCMP, approved by the director herself. The charges were dropped by the director. Now, what the lawyer for Mr. Norman said,
by prosecutors and the DPP, unimpacted by any political considerations, as it should be. She further underscored that is in fact how things are supposed to work. I agree with her assessment.
Bravo.
Honourable Member for Elmwood Transcona.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Nobody on this side is impugning the motives of the RCMP or the Director of Public Prosecutions. What we're impugning is the motives of a government who interfered in this case when the Prime Minister said before charges were laid that it was going to go to court, who hired the reporter that reported on Scott Bryson's pork barreling, and then who's been accused of having told witnesses what to say, Mr. Speaker. So that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of. And instead of trying to defend the Director of Public Prosecutions with their discredited word, they should launch an independent investigation to show that nothing happened. So what are we going to have?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I actually think it's quite unfortunate that it's come to this, because what it's come to is that in the last 4 months, we've had on 2 occasions the Director of Public Prosecutions feeling incumbent upon herself to issue public statements about non-interference. We know the first one was in February, when she talked about comments that related to a different matter that was being elaborated upon in this House. The second time is yesterday, and the fact that she's being compelled upon to issue these kinds of statements, declaring in the loudest voice possible that no influence occurred, is actually a function of the fact of the type of questioning that we're facing in this House. I think it's a sad state of affairs, because the independence is important.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, order. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Lévis. Mr. Speaker, when Vice Admiral Mark Norman stood up for the Navy against Scott Bryson's political interference, the PM attacked him, even before any charges were laid. The Liberals have not hesitated to drag the Vice Admiral's name in the mud, even though he's had an impeccable career. They've also endangered hundreds of jobs at Davy shipyards. Now, Davy did deliver the Astérix on time and on budget. When will the Prime Minister present an apology to Norman and restore him as head of the Canadian Navy? Mr. Speaker, the government took no decision in staying the charges. It was not aware of the decision taken by the Director of Public Prosecutions in this case. And it's actually, the Director of Public Prosecutions even said yesterday that there was no contact or influence whatsoever with respect to the Public Prosecution Services. The Honourable Member, Mr. Speaker, when Admiral Norman stood up for the Navy against Scott Bryson's political interference, what he was doing was making priorities. He was giving priority to friends of the Liberal Party. We know that Norman made the right decision in the interest of our nation. When will the Prime Minister apologize?
Mr. Speaker, as the Public Prosecution Service of Canada confirmed, every decision was made completely independently. Based on this decision, the Deputy Minister has revised the policy in place regarding Vice Admiral Norman's original request to have the legal fees paid for as this relates. I've agreed with this advice, Mr. Speaker, and have authorized it. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister himself said that Mark Norman would end up in court even before charges were laid. Clearly, this was a political attack on someone who is standing up for what is right. It is another example of the Prime Minister attacking someone who got in his way. When will the Prime Minister apologize and have Vice Admiral Norman reinstated as Vice Chief of Defence Staff?
Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I want to reiterate again from the Public Prosecution Service of Canada that every decision made was made independently, Mr. Speaker. I want to quote from the statement that was released. No other factors were considered in this decision, nor was there any contact or influence from outside the PPSC, including political influence in either initial decision to prosecute Mr. Norman or in the decision to stay the charge, Mr. Speaker. And General Vance, Chief of Defence Staff, will be meeting with Admiral Norman, and then we'll be talking with the next steps. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner.
But that's not what Canadians see in the aftermath of the Vice Admiral Norman travesty, Mr. Speaker. What they see is a pattern of corruption with the Prime Minister, the PMO, and this Liberal government who attack and try to discredit anyone who stands up for truth, who stands up for what is right, and who gets in their way. What is this government really so desperately trying to hide? Will the Prime Minister apologize to Vice Admiral Norman and reinstate him as the head of the Navy and second in command of our armed forces.
Minister of National Defense.
Mr. Speaker, as I stated, no other factors were considered in this case, and no influence was created, Mr. Speaker. General Vance will be speaking with Admiral Norman at the appropriate time. Discussion will be had, Mr. Speaker, as to the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Saskatoon West.